Hey everybody, Tactic Angel here, playing some World of Warships Legends on the PlayStation 4. Today, we're here to talk about another premium ship. This time, it's the Tier 7 French premium battleship, Jean Bart. As usual, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the ship, then we're going to move into some analysis, we'll run down all the stats, and finally finish off with some gameplay. If you want to skip around, I should have left an index in the description for you, so let's just jump right into it. The Jean Bart, or Jan Bart, as he would have been known in Dutch, was a commoner born in 1650, rising from a common sailor to privateer before surpassing the bounds of his birth by becoming a French captain and then admiral, a feat that would not really have been possible for people not born of noble birth in the 17th century. The French governments, such as they are, have named no less than 6 ships in his honor. And today we will be talking about the 5th of those, the 50,000-ton Richelieu-class battleship, Jean Bart. The history of the ship is actually rather interesting, because normally I would start off by telling you when she was laid down, when she was completed, and entered service. Unfortunately, this wouldn't make a whole lot of sense, because the ship's history is rather bizarre. In any case, the Jean Bart was laid down in December 1936 at Saint-Nazaire, France. She was launched hastily in March of 1940 in an incomplete state following the collapse of the French government during the Battle of France. The Jean Bart relocated to Casablanca to prevent her capture by the advancing German army. While in Casablanca, she was attached to the French Vichy government, which did its very best to bring the ship into some sort of operable condition. At that point, guns had only been installed in one of her turrets. She would acquire an interesting and asymmetrical assortment of anti-aircraft guns, sort of a salvage and naval hand-me-down program. During this time, the ship would have been subject to the same sort of conditions that the Dunkirk was, where she was obviously prohibited from fighting against Germany, but could have been brought to America, at that point a neutral power, for internment for the duration of the war, if its commander felt reasonably threatened that the ship might have fallen under the control of the Royal Navy or its allies. By the time the Jean Bart saw action, though, the Americans had entered the war. It was November 1942, and the Allies were invading German-held North Africa under Operation Torch. The Jean Bart was still in Casablanca, still not in service per se, but she was definitely armed and manned. The French were using her basically as a floating battery. The hope of Operation Torch would be for a speedy and largely bloodless surrender of the French forces in North Africa, and unfortunately the French forces, just like at Mers el-Kabir, put up a fight that was more than what was reasonably or sensibly called for. So on November 8, 1942, the Allies began their assault near Casablanca. The Jean Bart returned fire with 4 salvos of 2 shots each from her main guns and the use of her AA. For her trouble, she was struck twice by dauntless dive bombers armed with 500-pound bombs, several more times by the USS Massachusetts, the South Dakota-class battleship, and then F-4F Wildcats and even more dive bombers the next day with 1,000-pound bombs. Though only one of these hits really threatened to sink the ship, she was in shallow waters, and the combined attacks left her without steering, a damaged bow, and a massive hole blown in the starboard side of the stern. Eventually, the French in North Africa would switch sides again, and the Jean Bart sailed for the United States. There, the French hoped to finish her construction and return her to service in the war. However, the United States had really no interest in finishing the ship, and the French didn't quite know what to do about her either. A conversation about completing her as a battleship, converting her to an aircraft carrier, or scrapping her continued until the late 1940s. Eventually, she was completed in 1955, 19 years after she was laid down. She was placed into reserve 2 years later, and then scrapped in 1970. So my general thoughts on the Jean Bart is that she is definitely a contender for the most dangerous battleship at Tier 7. She definitely falls down quite a bit where durability is concerned, and that actually doesn't have all that much to do with her HP or armor. Instead, the problem with the Jean Bart, if you want to call it that, is that its turrets seem to be, at least to me, pretty fragile, and its effectiveness as a ship really relies a lot on having both of its turrets in the game at all times. Now, I will apologize now, and probably at least one or two more times during this review. Usually I like to get about 20 or 30 games into a ship before I put out a review, so what I'm giving you is the best information I can. But with this ship and the time of the year, obviously Christmas time, I probably only have around 15 games in this ship, and I'm not completely satisfied with this review, so cut me a little slack. So my specific comment about survivability of this ship is actually in reference to its turrets, which seem fairly fragile. So in the 15 or so games that I have played, I've lost one turret in all of the games except for about 5 of them, with 3 games where I can remember that I've had both turrets survive, and in 2 games I can remember where I lost both of them. And when I say lost both of them, I mean on a permanent basis. In order for your reload consumable to work, you cannot have either turret permanently knocked out. Now, I have asked whether this is a feature or a bug, but as of the recording of this, I haven't gotten an answer. My sense is that this is actually a feature, because the Jean Var is plenty good as it is, and learning how to keep your turrets in the game is probably part of how they expect to balance this ship and make you really learn how to play it well. So, before we jump into the stats, as far as commanders go, I'm going to hit this up briefly. The commander that I'm using is Emile Gaprat. Emile offers the Jean Var additional survivability in the form of increased healing potential and 2 abilities to lower the already excellent reload. The downside here is that you suffer a real chance of some pretty horrific dispersion because you don't have all that much working for you in terms of its accuracy. The other obvious choice for a battleship captain is Robert Jojard, who is the accuracy captain for the French. Jojard offers a better chance to hit and an even better chance to hit harder. You will take a little bit of a hit in terms of your maneuverability, but it's a definite argument that this captain should be the one that I'm using. That said, kind sir of the internet, my Jojard is quite a bit lower than my Gaprat. Plus, I don't float around in the back of the map all that often trying to play sniper battleship. The third option here is actually to use Louis de Fournay. Though I think it's probably the weakest of the 3 choices, you do have the option of running with fully packed, which would give you a 3rd enhanced reload consumable, if you can manage to keep both of your turrets in action for at least 8 minutes. I know that doesn't seem like much, but it's actually a longer period of time than the Jean Var's turrets actually worked during all of World War II. For the purposes of comparison, we're going to be comparing the Jean Var to the Richelieu. As we jump straight into survivability, what we're looking at is 69,000 hit points for the Jean Var, which is actually pretty decent. You are also sporting 18 to 430 millimeter armor. Your torpedo reduction is 32%, which is pretty respectable. Certainly the Iowa would love to have that. If you were to jump over to the Richelieu, you actually do end up with quite a few more hit points here, but at the expense of 3% torpedo reduction. In my estimation, this is actually a pretty significant win for the Jean Var, but the survivability stat here isn't really telling you anything about the durability of the turrets. As we jump into artillery, we're looking at both ships having 4x2 480mm guns. The Richelieu has a minor advantage in terms of its overall range, however it has a significant disadvantage in terms of reload speed. The Jean Var is actually around 3.5 seconds faster. They both rotate their turrets at around 41.4 seconds, which actually feels fairly manageable considering the forward location of both turrets. The damage is exactly the same. You're looking at 5,400 damage at a 36% fire chance for both ships and dealing 11,900 damage on a successful citadel. Now the Jean Var does score a little bit higher in terms of its artillery rating. That is in part due, I think, to the increased reload speed, but it also has something to do with all of these extra secondaries. The Jean Bart has an extra 6 by 2 100mm secondaries, though the secondaries on the Jean Bart don't quite shoot as far. Where AA is concerned, the Jean Bart really doesn't have a whole lot of peers because every gun that I've mentioned in the secondary armament counts towards its AA defense, the same as the Richelieu. It has 14 by 2 57mm turrets, which do an obscene amount of damage. If there are ever aircraft carriers in the game, you would be wise to not send your planes against a Jean Bart. Where maneuverability is concerned, this is actually one of the few places where the Richelieu is a little better. The Richelieu is both 1 knot faster than the Jean Bart and also has a slightly better rudder shift. Both of the ships turn at a very wide 850 meters, but they do feel relatively nimble in the water with quick left and right movements of the ship, allowing them to somewhat dodge torpedoes. They just don't turn around all that quickly. In terms of concealment, the Jean Bart is actually slightly less concealed than the Richelieu if you were to apply equal camo. A lot of people aren't going to waste a lot of time on camo for a battleship, but that said, you are going to lose out just a little bit by about 1/10 of a kilometer in most cases in terms of overall sea detectability, detectability by air, and also while firing from smoke. Alright, so here we go, getting into some gameplay. We're going to be on Two Brothers. I'm actually going to start this game a little bit into the actual game because I spent a lot of time staring at the player list, and I didn't really think I needed to put that into a video. Here you see I'm right behind my sister ship, the Richelieu. I put a nice hit down on that New Orleans, so we're really kind of starting ourselves off towards a good game. Aiming for that Iowa that's just flat broadside to me. Yeah, it ends up taking a pretty heavy toll there. And at 47,000 damage already, feeling even better about everything. So we see the Richelieu is also shooting at the Iowa. I'm putting some additional shells down on him. I can't appear to aim or zoom in. Not as good as last time. Kind of thinking about finishing off that New Orleans, but not really worth it. Not really worth a volley. Also, my dispersion is a little questionable with this ship, so we don't want to invest too much in trying to shoot smaller targets. Now we see a full strength Miyoko. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can't hit him. We got some shells out there. We got a pretty nice dispersion. Pretty nice understatement. That said, you saw how that was wide and flat. That is kind of a lucky shot. And that said, it's just one of those things that you have to deal with as a cruiser, unfortunately. We go ahead, pop that reload boost, seeing if we can't delete another cruiser. We're obviously trying to pick on this Atago. He's real broadside to me. As it turns out, we can. Now, in general, I would suggest use your reload boost early in the game. There are a couple reasons for this. First of all, like I said, if you do lose a turret, you can't use it anymore. So sometimes you end up with a situation where you've lost a turret permanently and you're just holding on to this stuff. And obviously, if you're holding on to it, it doesn't do you any good. I'm going to stop rambling here for a moment about the reload consumable to make a gentle little dodge, and then we'll get right back into it. The other reason why it's a good idea to maybe use your reload consumable early in the game is because if you can get a ship out of the game early, then it has no chance to damage anyone on your team. So as people are repositioning, definitely consider try to take them out of the game before they have a chance to hurt your teammates. Now, I've lost my front turret. It's only temporary, so that's not super terrible. What I try to do in this ship is try to present an angle that's worth shooting at the side of me. I'm not quite steep enough here, or I'm not quite shallow enough, actually. I should be trying to invite more shots into my side to preserve my turrets. Now, I've lost my super firing turret, and as you can see here, we're still on the cooldown for my reload, so you're not going to see that I can't use it, but I'm not going to be able to use it. We're coming up on another Jean Bart. Slowly but surely. This wouldn't actually be a terrible time for me to use my speed boost if I was really interested in doing something silly. It's actually only about this time that I've realized that I've completely outrun my coverage, and my entire team is like super far behind me. I'm going to take a shot here. I get 3 bounces off of the cheek of the Jean Bart. I'm a little bit surprised by that. This is one of my earlier games. And now you can see my secondaries working off of both sides. In terms of a secondary build, I wouldn't suggest it. You might be inclined to do it, and I really wish it would work, but I don't think the range is great enough, and we're going to pause here just to get a nice good hit in on that Iowa. We managed to disable one of the turrets. Now, I really should try to swing my guns around to the other side, but I'm not sure which way I want to go. We're getting a lot of hits with secondaries. We've got the 152s on the back that are finally hitting the Iowa. Those 152s, which kind of look like they would be significant, because it's kind of like having a Nuremberg strapped to the back of the ship. That said, they have pretty bad arcs, honestly, and they can't fire forward but more than a couple degrees. So honestly, if you're counting on the hundreds, they're not going to do a ton of damage, though they will get a lot of hits. I'm going to speed this up a little bit, and as I do so, I'm going to just hit on some of the big picture things about the Jean Bart. I actually really like this ship. I like it because it's a pretty ship, for one. I like the dazzle pattern on it. I don't know that it's necessarily historic. I certainly couldn't find a picture with this particular camouflage on this particular ship, but I do feel like it's reasonably accurate in terms of what some of the dazzle patterns were historically. And since the Jean Bart didn't really participate when dazzle patterns were like the thing, then, you know, it fits in with the game without being necessarily historic. I start aiming at that last destroyer. The game ends because he loses the last tiny bit of HP he had left. Now here you see our result. A little bit better than what I typically like to post in a review. But anyway, there we are on the top of the charts. And here we see, obviously, the economics. Playing Tier 7 battleships, not exactly a huge moneymaker. You'd be better off playing Tier 6 ships. But it's still, if you're going to play Tier 7, pretty fun. A real high damage potential with the Jean Bart. I am definitely going to be trying to earn this during the campaign. I do want to thank Wargaming for loaning this to me for this week. In any case, I hope that this review has been informative for you guys, and I'll see you guys on the next one.